me real pleasure to introduce our guest today, Amanda Anderson, who is an author, speaker, blogger, and freelance journalist. The focus of her ministry is on authentic relationships between people, and specifically with a focus on how we can grow as Christians through those relationships, but also by paying attention to our well-being, spiritual, social, and psychological. Now, I came across your very recent book, All My Friends Have Issues, and that really struck me as a book that has some very strong messages for childless people. Firstly, it has a huge amount of really practical and detailed advice about how to conduct friendships, but also you obviously have a really strong sense of what it is that brings people to God. But it's all put in such an entertaining and human way as well. So first of all, can I ask what it was that gave you the impetus for writing that book?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for trusting me with this sensitive subject. I'm honored to be here. This book, I always joke that God really chose this book for me. I had written a different book that was really about self-awareness and Christian recovery, and signed with an agent based on that manuscript. And then as we were preparing to try to sell that, I was hired to speak at a mother's conference on All My Friends Have Issues, this subject that I'd been teaching for a while around Southern California where I live. And the publisher that we'd approached with the first manuscript said, we like this book, but would she write a book called All My Friends Have Issues first? And I said, yes, I will. I will write that book. So it actually was chosen for me, but it turned out to be a great journey for me because I'm a woman without sisters. I have 2 younger brothers raised by a mother who had 4 sisters, and those female relationships were just absolutely central and critical in her life. And I pined for sisters. And so I grew up really wanting to create relationships that had a sense of permanence and belonging with other women. And I didn't have really any idea how to do that, and made a lot of missteps along the way. So researching the book came from a lot of, at the expense of looking at a lot of really personal pain and failure in this. And then also, okay, what has worked? What's gone right? And it's continues to be something I'm learning, and I have to follow my own advice quite regularly, I find.
Can I just say that although the sort of emphasis of the book officially is on relationships between women, I found a lot of it really spoke to me as well, in terms of the nitty-gritty of being friends with people and the hard situations and the great situations that can involve.
Yeah, we listened to it together, mostly, in our kitchen, and I found it extremely practical, just extremely practical, and I found myself reflecting back on my friendships and on why things went wrong for me in the past, and I just was really, really impressed, and I can really relate to your need for sisterhood because I'm an only child. So for me, my friends, my cousins were always the people I really tried to stay close to, because I always felt like, well, who's there for me if not them? I don't have a sister or even a brother, and so that really struck me as something I could relate to, and I found it really useful.
And there's a lot of really kind of personal stories in the book. I wanted to ask, did you discuss that with some of the people involved? Was there any sort of reticence?
Yes, and they all got to read the chapters that they were in. Most of the stories, as you know, I didn't even change people's names. The book is dedicated to, I joke, my J's. At the time that I wrote the book, all my best friends' names were Jenny, Gina, Jody, Jana, Jenny, and Jill, which is very confusing for the reader. So I told the women in it, I said, don't worry, they'll get you confused. They won't ever remember which J you were.
There's something to it.
Right. But they were they were very brave. I did give them input. It was interesting because a couple of the women came back and made some corrections or gave me a different side of the stories that I was recounting. A couple said, "Oh goodness, that was a dark time for us, wasn't it? You know, it makes me kind of want to cringe reading it." But yeah, the book is written in community. I mean, I couldn't write this without them. So I'm very grateful to those women for being brave. And they joke, like they promoted it and they said on their social media and things and said, "My best friend wrote this book called All My Friends Have Issues. So here, here you go." That was courageous of them.
On the subject of sort of friendships and how that relates to the situation of childless people who are childless not through choice, it's been our experience, and I think that it's quite typical that it's very easy as a childless person to get stuck in kind of groups that have a kind of negative feel to them, in that we are there because we're all childless, and what we principally discuss is childlessness, and swapping anecdotes about maybe something insensitive that we heard today or something like that. It's really difficult to sometimes to kind of break out of those not break out but move on with those people. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts about how we can recognize when that's happening and what we can do about it.
Yeah. And I think that's a common problem in all kinds of relationships. I talk in the book about trying to form friendships based on common interests rather than forming alliances against other people, which I'll speak to women. It can be an issue for women that we're the ones that aren't trying so hard. We're not wearing so much makeup. We just show up to school in our yoga pants. We don't want to be friends with the high powered, whatever. It's very easy. It's just kind of human nature to form groups against people rather than with people, right? So it's not unique to that. I would say that there's a great distinction between support groups and friendships. And that there are places to go where we have a support group where the purpose of that is to share that hurt and put a limit on it. I come out of a 12-step recovery background where I worked a 12-step program for codependency, which is a relational compulsion. And when we share in a support group, we have a 3-minute timer and everyone gets 3 to 5 minutes to talk. And we find that is enough. And then some of the women that I have made friends with out of that group, it's based on our common interests rather than our struggle or our lack. So if you make a friend in a support group, there is something to be said for a mutual agreement, an actual conversation where can we set boundaries around this topic? When we're here, let's talk about this.
Yes.
But then let's find, I value you for all of your other interests, or I love your sense of humor, or you want to go see a movie, to really move towards the positive and purposeful things in our life and actually have a conversation about that.
Yes. Okay.
I think that's extremely useful, and it's really simple, but I never thought about it, that there's such a clear distinction, and that you can take your friend out of that context, so to speak. That's really helpful. I think that's fantastic.
It rings true for me as well. I mean, thinking about one particular example from my life, there was a course which I did fairly recently about eating disorders, which is something that I've suffered from over the years. And so the group got together online. It was done by a sort of Zoom style webinar, and then at the end of the course, 11-week course, we moved from that kind of webinar situation where it's fairly passive, you sit and watch a talk, and then it was suggested that we move on to a kind of WhatsApp group, where it's kind of more like a kind of friendly interaction, still online, but friendly. You know, there was a lot of kind of peculiar negotiation as to what it is we actually are here to talk about. You know, we were together because of the webinar thing, but now what do we post photographs of sunsets or what? You know?
Right.
So yeah, that really rang true with me. So
there was a novel that came to mind when I was thinking about this discussion. There was a book I read called What Alice Forgot. It's by an Australian novelist. I don't know if you're familiar with it, and it's quite a brilliant book, but one of the characters struggles with infertility, and it's this Lane Moriarty is the author, and she writes about infertility in a number of her books. I think she probably had some experience with it. But in What Alice Forgot, she talks about being part of this support group for women going through infertility, and then one by one they would get pregnant and leave.
Yes.
And so the goal was like to get out of these relationships, and it just brought to mind like how difficult that is. And I think that happens. We see that in our church, in our recovery ministries with people in a divorce support group, for example, or anything that you bonded over pain. You kind of see people graduate and go, whether they graduated from their pain or they are no longer single or they're no longer childless.
Yes.
And so that's why support group and friendship we have to have a distinction where we're building relationships outside of those spaces, because the goal is that those spaces would be transitional, not permanent. Like you wouldn't necessarily be in a grief group for 10 years. You would, ideally the grief group would help you process that and move forward.
Yeah, you're there for a specific purpose, whereas with friendship is much broader and more all-encompassing than just dealing with that particular issue. That makes sense. So that kind of brings us to the subject of online relationships in general. As you can imagine, being childless is a bit isolating at times when you sort of find yourself surrounded with people having families. So people do look for support online, and we've made a lot of friends and acquaintances in various support groups all over the place. But this is mostly online because there's often distance involved. And so, you know, that can be sort of isolating in its own way. And in your book, you talk quite a lot about the distinction between online and sort of face-to-face relationships. Why is it so important to nurture those face-to-face relationships? What do they give us that we can't get online?
Right. That was a terrible part of the book in 2020, because I really sold it on this idea that you really need to have people in your homes, and
suddenly you can't.
Suddenly can't. But on the other hand, hasn't it just really taught us the lesson of how precious it is to be in people's presence?
Absolutely.
Yes.
The reality is that God designed us. He designed our physicality, our neurochemistry, everything about us, and he designed it without, I mean, presumably he knew Zoom would exist and the internet, but that we weren't created for online relationships. We're created for in-person relationships. And there's so much that happens in person to soothe our nervous system, to make us feel connected. There was a great article I read, and I've forgotten the source, oh no, that was saying that one of the things we have to do intentionally right now during the pandemic, when we couldn't be together, was to speak things like, I really want to be here with you. I'm really glad we're here. Because when you're in person with people, that's being communicated through body language and even by making the time to be together. And so that highlighted to me, being with other people, that belonging that we need, sharing a physical space is what creates that for us. It also helps us feel like we're a priority in someone's life, that they've taken the time to see us in person. And we just can't get those really even neurological benefits on a computer or even typing. We also, it's, you know, the goal for me of authentic relationship is to create self-awareness and spiritual growth. And it's very easy to hide online. It's, I mean, right now you see this this background that I have carefully curated to be pleasing to the eye as you watch this interview. And if I were to turn the computer around, you would see the breakfast, the like destroyed part of my kitchen, which is the reality of my life.
Cardboard boxes down here.
It's a complete great metaphor to understand how easy it is to hide 90% of who we are when we're online.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
It's just not enough.
I have somebody who I only know via Twitter and sort of interact with a fair bit, but he said an interesting thing which I thought was really counterintuitive. He said that if you're on Twitter long enough, you can't hide. Eventually your real character will come out, but I think that's something about the kind of long-term and intensive, very short, communications in lots of detailed situations of life.
Right. Well, and because people are more complicated than what they think and what their opinions are. We're holistically, the pleasure of a friendship is not just what they think or what their feelings are, but their mannerisms, the way they make you feel in being in the room with someone, what it feels like to be in their home, getting exercise together. There's so many parts of relationships that are beyond just what we think, who we agree with. And it reduces our relationships down to who's on the same page as me, and it's easy to take everyone who's challenging and cut them out of your life on the internet.
Yes, right? Absolutely.
This is something we often talk about, that sort of the online world made it a lot easier for people to compartmentalize. That's a difficult word. You know what I mean? Like, people just choose who they want to hang out with, because in person they would be nicer, but over the internet they can just narrow down their focus and become quite ruthless with who they are.
I know people like them.
Well, and our pastor just gave a brilliant sermon this weekend about politics, and in the United States, politics has been just horrific in the last year. And he was saying that we've come to a place where we're more comfortable with people who share our voter registration card and create communities out of our political party rather than our Christianity, our faith. And that is something that's partly happened online. I'm more comfortable being with a Democrat or a Republican than I am with, and that becomes our religion. So whenever we come to only be able to talk about one thing, that becomes the primary thing in our lives.
There's I don't know if you know, there's a guy called Sheridan Voisey who's writes, amongst other things, about childlessness. He is actually a childless person himself, and he wrote today about his email newsletter came around, and it was about precisely the subject, and it was taking as an example the business over the split in the royal family, and the American side, Harry and Meghan, and making precisely that point. When it comes down to a question of these mega splits between grand tribes, people are very ready to sort of jump to judgment without any kind of real evidence. But being physically with somebody, and hanging out with them in a more natural, face-to-face kind of way gives you all those cues and helps you to really know them as a person in a way that you just can't.
And be kinder.
Degrees of someone rather than just a flat image.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing which I think is really pertinent for childless people in relation to friendship is that often there's an expectation that I think childless people feel that other people should creep around them a little bit and be super sensitive in relation to them, and in relation to fertility issues especially. I think sometimes it becomes a bit unreasonable in the expectation. And I was wondering, what do you think is it reasonable for not just childless people, but people who have had a tough time or have some particular challenge in general? What is it reasonable for them to expect from their friends? And well, anyway.
How to navigate
how to navigate that.
How to find
situation.
that balance.
Well, that makes me want to hide under the bed. First, I want to say that one of the things I study a lot is the concept of boundaries, where my personal responsibility is. And one of the most brutal things in studying spiritual boundaries is that I'm responsible for my feelings, and you are responsible for yours. So when I say something like, she made me angry or she made me feel guilty, I'm really expressing a boundaries issue. It's up to me to decide how I'm going to respond and feel. That's a kind of spiritual maturity. So that's the first basic thing, is that it is our job to determine how we are going to react to people and to manage our own feelings. On the other hand, childless people have a really legitimate gripe. Can I just say that? You're not imagining what people with children say and think about childless people. So there is, Anne Lamott is one of my favorite writers, and she writes something brilliant where she says that people say that, I know you've heard this, like that there's this prevalent idea that you can never really grow up if you don't have children, and there are certain spiritual lessons you can never learn if you don't have children. And she said that's just such garbage, because she said some of the least evolved, cruel, unself-aware people I know are parents, and people who don't have children have well, first of all, the Holy Spirit is who helps us understand the love of God. Like, we say, oh, you never understand how much God loves you to have kids. That's ridiculous. So I just wanted to start with saying those two things are ridiculous. God's Spirit is not available only to people who have children. To understand who God is and to fill your full potential as a human being. But you're right, people with children say things like that. So I don't blame people for being sensitive about it. Here's what I think. I think we should expect people to be kind in their timing. If you have just suffered a miscarriage or found out that you are never going to be able to have a baby, I should not call you and expect you to rejoice in the fact that I just got pregnant with twins. I mean, that I would not come to you with that. Just as a friend who was just divorced, I would not call her to complain about a small fight I had with my wonderful husband. Or I would not call to complain about my job when you've just been fired, but in the long run, if we're in a close relationship, I also would not be able to be expected to never mention my children or ask me to be privy to the major milestones in our life around them. For me to not be able to speak about something I'm excited about or concerned about. I mean, I am a mother. I have teenage daughters. It's a great blessing and privilege. If one of them was really suffering from an illness or had gone completely prodigal, I wouldn't be able to be close to you without sharing the pain of what was going on.
Yes.
And for a childless friend to go, you're just lucky you have kids, would be insensitive on their part. So I think, so I think sensitivity to timing, reading people's body language. I also think that we could expect, to a degree, if you have a close relationship with someone with children, that they should occasionally get a babysitter so they can spend some time with you in a completely non-child driven way.
Okay. Yes.
If you really desire to have a baby and can't, I'm not going to just ask you to sit and watch me breastfeed and go to the zoo, that. And I hope I always joke, I speak to moms groups a lot. It's a big part of my base, but I don't speak about parenting. I think of myself as a woman with children as opposed to a mother primarily. And I hope that I have something else to talk about and be interested in than my own children. I'm interested in politics and spiritual growth and gardening and sewing and movies and books. So I think it's fair to have an expectation first that you won't say completely stupid and hurtful things, but if you do, that I am responsible to tell you.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That attitude you just expressed to me is hurtful to me as a childless person. Can you be sensitive to that in the future?
I think from the sort of childless person's perspective, I think there's a call to draw on forgiveness and to really learn that spiritual discipline of thoroughly and honestly forgiving, not holding a grudge. That's a responsibility on the childlessness person's side.
But I think it's also a responsibility to speak when you've been hurt. I talk about that in the book a lot, that it's much easier it's easier for me to admit when I'm wrong than to tell you that you have hurt my feelings. I really want to be seen as someone who, I'm not sensitive, I'm easygoing. The reality is I am sensitive and I'm not easygoing. I hold on to things. I have like a audiographic memory. If you say something that hurts me, I can replay it over and over again. So it's my So it's my responsibility to actually tell you as someone that I want to be intimately involved in my life. You know what, Jen, I'll use my best friend's name, Jen. You said this thing and it's sticking with me. And I want to give you the opportunity to acknowledge it, or I would like to explain to me why that was hurtful and hope that, we won't have that kind of conversation again. And
it was one of the things I really admired about the book, actually, was the real kind of emotional maturity with which you address those situations, those real specific situations. I thought, well, I'd probably have struggled to come up with that phrasing or that way of presenting myself in such a difficult situation.
It occurred to me as I was listening to that bit of the book that I often even lied to myself about it, and I tried to tell myself that not just present it to the other person, but actually persuade myself that no, I'm not hurt at all. It wasn't painful. I can cope with that. I'm grown up. It's not a problem. And it made me realize that I was being unfair both to myself and to that friend who never heard from me that I was hurt.
And most safe people actually relish the opportunity to apologize. It's a great litmus test of relationships. When you go to someone and say, I was hurt by this, their response is very telling about how that relationship is going to work out. And, I joke in the book, I kind of talk about, I think I talk about this in the book, or is it in my new Bible study, but this 1 week rule concept that give yourself a week to say something and give the other person a week to apologize, because sometimes it takes that amount of time to kind of lower our defenses. It takes that amount of time to decide, can I let this go? Peter Scazzaro is an American author that wrote a book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. I draw on that book a lot in my writing and my speaking. And he talks about, look, it would be great if we just never got our feelings hurt, but the reality is that we do. And if we pretend that we don't, we will leak. It will sneak out sideways. And I was in a therapy session recently and I said, hey, I want you to fix this wound. I have this wound in my past. And so my friend did something and it hurt so bad because it reminded me of this old thing. And I said, so, do your voodoo, fix that to my therapist. And he said, I would love for this to be all your fault and that you're just broken and we could fix you, but I don't have a tool to make you so healthy that hurtful things don't hurt you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that was worth the money I paid him, because somehow I think in the church, we are supposed to forgive, but forgiveness doesn't mean denying pain. Forgiveness means that hurts so much but I'm going to choose not to pay it back, and I'm going to choose to let go of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And we hurt our relationships when we try to just pretend like nothing hurt us.
Yes.
It's not how it works.
Yeah.
There's
very
that
much so.
fantastic C.S. Lewis quote, forgiving, we can forgive everything. I can't remember the exact wording. You can forgive everything because the unspeakable has been forgiven in you, or something like that. Anyway,
Right.
We've been
Right.
forgiven by God, and
Yeah.
so we should be able to forgive.
And God's forgiveness, he didn't minimize our sin when he forgave us. I mean, we
Absolutely.
hear, forgive as the Lord forgive you, and just forgive. And I don't think you can put the word just before forgiveness. I hate the word just, and that's such a minimizing word. I don't know if it's so much in the vernacular in Britain, but people say just pray, just forgive, just do this when you're, you know, just be consistent. Shut up with just. There's no that is so difficult. And you know, if you forgave as God forgave you, it cost the death of his son to forgive me. He didn't just flick of the wrist forgive. It was a deep pain that God endured in order to forgive me. And so who am I to think that forgiveness isn't going to be painful? In fact, if you aren't in pain when you forgive someone, you probably haven't done it. You haven't really acknowledged the harm.
So, I mean, without being sort of over dramatic or sort of self-pitying about it, there is a sort of you know, a call to accept a little cross in those moments of forgiveness. I think, you know, which all these people.
Absolutely.
Another section of your book I really enjoyed and which really spoke to me was the one where you describe, you know, the difference between being authentic and oversharing. Because I think I've been at both extremes in my life, especially early on as I was sort of learning, you know, how friendships worked. And, you know, so, you know, at one hand, you shouldn't just, you know, share your deepest secrets with someone you've just met, but equally if you pretend to someone who's quite close to you that everything is perfect in your life when it isn't, both these things just don't really work and don't bring you any closer to people. Already I've done both a lot. So it's a fine balance, and you go into quite a lot of detail in your book, but are there some simple guidelines how to, you know, find that balance, you know, how to open up at the right moment and at the right level?
Well, I'm a chronic oversharer, so this is something that I've learned. Low and slow. You start low and slow. Small confidences is how to open up intimacy. You know, we might start with sharing authentically small struggles and open up to big ones, because as we share small emotions or struggles that we have, we can judge by people's responses if they can handle the next thing. I don't like being given unsolicited advice, especially if it has the word just in it, as I have described. Have I been guilty of doing that? Yes, I have in certain situations, but I think we've all been in places like maybe in a Bible study or in a Christian community where you share something you're struggling with and someone just immediately goes into fixing or minimizing. And to me, that would show me, you know, there's not enough spiritual maturity in this that I want to continue to share this thing. It doesn't mean I end that relationship, but it's not the place I'm going to take this particular concept or idea or part of my life. And that is a big part of the sharing when to and when not to, is that there truly are intimate circles where we share our deepest things. And then it's good to have friends in the slightly outer circle and outer. Not everyone that you connect with needs to know the deep grief that you're suffering. And in fact, it's dangerous. You know, you can be re-wounded and it becomes I talk in the book about, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If anyone ever really knew me, they would run. And if I start a relationship with just the raw grief, or I think I say in the book, I knew a woman who used to tell people in the second time she was with them, I used to cut my mom's cocaine lines when I was 10. It's like, people are like, I don't know what to, I don't know what to do with that, like, I mean, deeper in, tell me that story. I'm fascinated to know about your upbringing. But, and people would be like, yeah, I'm out. I don't know what to do with that. And so it would show her, we don't want to go into relationships with the idea of if you're going to leave early. That's the wrong attitude. So let me tell you the worst stuff. If you're going to leave me, just leave now.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to share as a dare. We want to share to build trust.
Yes, at the right moment. I think, men are often said to have an armored approach to relationships, but I think what it sometimes is that they have these concentric circles. It's just that the outer concentric circles are overpopulated. I'm thinking of my own relationships. I have, a lot of male friends who, I'll only speak to really about one particular subject. They're my sailing friend, or my, friend who's interested in gardening and that kind of stuff, or the music, books, all those things, and I'll exchange a monthly sort of email update with those people and about on the given subject. And occasionally I have kind of just tested the waters, as it were, by dropping in incidental information about whether they some more pressing kind of issue in my personal life. And sometimes that's taken up, and sometimes it's not. I just so in that sense, I think it's probably quite similar for men as well.
Yeah, you want to, you're gauging both their maturity and their interest.
Yes.
Someone
Absolutely.
who asks more questions or then responds in kind with their own disclosure. That's great. I will say that in my relationships, I am definitely in every single one of my friendships, I am definitely the one that's willing to share more. That's just how God made me. I don't expect a kind of a tit for tat sharing of frequency, not even a little bit. All of my friends are more introverted than I am because there's just only room for one of me. That makes sense. But there is some sort of reciprocation, I think, that is a way of showing if people are safe. Are they willing to also prove that they have something that they need? There's a wonderful book called Safe People by John Townsend and Henry Cloud. They wrote a book about boundaries, and then they also wrote this book, Safe People. And they talk about friendships being mutual, and it's unsafe when someone is only there to fix you, but they're not willing to share where they need you. They won't admit that they need something from the relationship. So I am looking for people who need me too. I have things to give. I can take your secrets too.
Yes. So given that not all relationships run smooth, and sometimes they splutter at the start and don't even necessarily get that far, it's important. One thing that you address in the book is the skills required for negotiating knockbacks and maybe even the end of a relationship. What is good practice if you find that a friendship is, that they are not the person who can accompany you on your journey, with a difficult or something that's really central to your life, like childlessness?
Right. I meditated on this a lot recently, and I think there are seasons in our life where we're going through something acute, where our circle just narrows down. But that doesn't mean that we have to burn the bridges with those who can't cross into that space with us. I've learned a lot about that in the COVID era, that there was so much worldwide stress and trauma and grief. And even within my inner circle of, say, 6, there were really only 2 or 3 people that I could really walk this year with. But that doesn't mean that the other relationships are out of my life. So That's the first thing I would say about that. In terms of grieving childlessness, grief is not something that most cultures do very well. As an American, I will say that we don't do grief very well because we are extremely optimistic culture. And if you can't fix it, there's no point talking about it. Let's get you through this as fast as possible and back on the path to your dreams. And from what I know of all the British Netflix that I watch and all of the books I read as an English lit major.
We're pretty buttoned up.
Right.
We don't talk well about grief either.
Right. Grief is like, if we were Italian, there's a great line in Downton Abbey that Edith says that I will not do in the accent. Please, God, don't let me slip into the accent. Where she says, don't you just sometimes want to be an Italian where you can just throw yourself on the coffin with the wailing?
I remember that line, yeah.
Right. And which my brother married an Italian woman, so I loved that because there was a lot of hand gestures.
Absolutely.
But the point I'm trying to make is there are very few people, even really good, beautiful, faithful people who are very poor at walking through mourning, are very poor at walking through grief. And that doesn't mean that they aren't good friends.
Sure.
We've just been absolutely conditioned to be bad at sitting in pain with people.
Yeah.
It challenges our very theology. There's something in our humanity that says, I want to believe in sort of a pagan God where I do these things and I get these good results.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right? And we go through something like infertility. I experienced secondary infertility just for a year of no idea why we cannot have a baby.
Yes.
And we still have no idea why. And nothing challenges your sense of control.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like death or infertility. Like I thought I did this for God and I was supposed to get this. And you don't realize that you believe that until you face a loss. And the problem is that people around you are afraid of your loss. They want to figure out the reason that you couldn't have what you want, because then they will be safe. So this is a very long answer to your question. Don't cut off your friendships that can't go with you in the depths sometimes. If you can come out of grief with one or two people who can sit Shiva with you, like Job's friends that sat on the ground with him for 7 days and just said, we're not going to say anything and we'll just be in pain with you. If you find one or two people, that's rare, keep them. And until the rawness of your mourning is over, then you just kind of insulate yourself from those who can't go there with you. In recovery, we talk about walking into some relationships, zipping up your scuba suit. So we have kind of this idea where there are some places that I go, even when I'm in pain, where I just imagine that I'm just zipping my inner self up, guarding it, and finding that there's actually even some relief in moving into some spaces where I don't even give myself the freedom to go there, where I can take a break from my grief or from this deep process.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause and see if I answered that question and let you give me.
No, absolutely. It was very practical. As with all of your advice, I think it was extremely practical.
I like the idea of zipping up.
Yes.
that's helpful. I like that. I'm going to use that. So I have another question, which is that doesn't just pertain to childless people, but it does affect us quite deeply, is that often people struggle to find a purpose in life. Obviously for us this is a challenge because we had a plan for our lives and it didn't work out the way we thought it would. But it's not just us. A lot of people just don't really know what their purpose in life is, or are struggling at different points in their lives. And can our friends help us find our purpose, or can we help our friends find our purpose? Do we have a role to play?
Gosh, I hope so. I think one of the best things that we do as friends is offer the perspective of what we see in them, the encouragement of, this is what I see. that I love about how God made you. I believe our purpose is almost always related to something that we love and feel passionate about.
Yes.
As a child growing up in Sunday school, I thought my purpose was going to be doing the exact opposite thing of what I really wanted to do because of the story of Moses. I thought, okay, this is what's going to happen. God is going to tell me to do something, and I'm going to say, no, 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 please don't send me. Please don't send me. And as an adult, I look at that story, and in Sunday school, we're like, and Moses had a stutter, so he was not a good person, and God's going to call you to do something you're terrible at. That was the lesson.
Unless you're terrible at it and terrified of it, don't even think about it.
Right. And when God called me to be a teacher and a speaker, I thought, oh no, this can't be right, because that sounds really fun. Something else wants me to do. Hand me the microphone. Oh no. Okay, never mind. Because I'd always heard Christian speakers say, I didn't want to do this, and God made me. And I was like, I've always wanted to do this. Pay me to talk and eat cheesecake. Yes, it's perfect. But if you really look at the story of Moses, Moses was perfectly gifted to do that job. He was raised in Pharaoh's house. He was a Hebrew raised in Pharaoh's house. He had a passion for the people of God. He had a love of the Hebrew people, and he had a knowledge of the culture, of the Egyptian culture to go in. And so he was just had a momentary lapse, but it was absolutely who he was, right?
Yes.
And so my friends have said, there have been so many times where I've wondered, should I be doing this? Whatever this is. And my girlfriend has said, are you kidding me? What else are you going to do? Like, of course you're supposed to do this. So yeah, the people that we spend time with, and again, this is why in-person relationships are so critical. People that see us in 360 degrees, who see the way we interact with people, what we love beyond what I would call our straight spiritual gifts. You know, we learn in the church about, I have a spiritual gift of teaching, shepherding, prophecy, mercy, whatever those are. You can take those things on the internet, quizzes that'll tell you what your spiritual gift is. But the people that know you, that spend time with you, that see how people respond to you, what you really love, they can speak those things into us and say, why don't you do this? Or even share, I mean, our purpose really, all of us share a purpose. Love God and love people. That's what Jesus said. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor. Yes. And so we're really just trying to find the specific permutation of that.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where friends come in and they point out our giftings.
There's a very special role for those really long-term friends. You know, the people who you first knew at university and you kind of stay in touch with since. And I mean, of course, that's become a lot easier to sort of get back in touch with those people because of social media. But they are people who shared your adult life journey. I mean, after the time that you left, you know, your parents' home and started to think about becoming, you know, a more independent person with your own goals and aims. And they come from often a similar background as well. They'll have very kind of similar experiences. I think those, if you're really lucky, there can be one or two of those people who will really have a lot to offer you. I can think of, you know, at least one person in my life who, you know, I almost feel selfish because of the amazing value that she, not value, but, you know, the amazing love that she has shown in the advice that she, and encouragement's the word, over the years, you know, because she was able to kind of see the patterns that would elude other people. And you know, I hope there's other people who I am able to offer the same kind of favor to as well. It's a great vocation, I think, to be an encourager, and one which people can do for other people as well as kind of receiving it.
Absolutely. And like really also being able to tell us when we're spinning our wheels in the wrong direction is another part of that. Like, not just encouraging, this is what I see you good at, but hopefully in a more kind way, and sometimes not, depending on your relationship. What are you wasting your time with this for?
Yeah, that's even actually a much more difficult and much more valuable thing, because only the most special of friends could say that. And you know that it does take a particular kind of wisdom to spot that as well. But the bravery, we're all sort of in. Sorry?
Yeah, someone that says to you, is this really what you want to do? Because I know that you love this. I know that you value this. And this is what my first manuscript was about, was basing your life on what you love and value. And God willing, it will get published eventually. But I see this in you. But it seems like this is taking an awful lot of your time.
Yes.
Yes.
Is that on purpose? And then also to back off and they go, no, this is what I'm doing. Okay, cool. All right, that's fine.
Yes.
Sometimes a month later they go, dang it, yeah, you're right. I was just offered an opportunity, a volunteer opportunity. I like how my church puts it that way. I was offered a volunteer opportunity to be the project manager of this huge thing that they were doing for the summer. And it was right in my wheelhouse. I mean, just everything that I know how to do. I was a magazine editor and a journalist, and they were putting together like an art and creative writing magazine to go along with the sermon series.
Wow.
That the hope was it would drive people into deeper seasons of recovery and spiritual growth. I'm like, oh, shoot, that is just all the things I care about. I'm going to probably have to say yes to that. And I told a couple of friends that I was considering the position, and they both kind of went, seriously?
They couldn't see it.
They're like, no. Well, what they said was, you don't have time to do that right now.
Oh, all right.
And I was like, no, I think I can do it. And then they kind of both, are you sure? So I ended up turning it down. And when I decided to turn it down, I just felt like such an incredible amount of relief. And it came from, and their ability to say that to me came from what they know about my issues. That there's a great verse in James that says, everyone who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it, that is sin for them.
All right.
And before I did codependent recovery, I read that as all the good there is to do and doesn't do it. It is sin for them. And
so the difficulty of turning things down was.
Right. And so everything that I want to do or would be good to do doesn't mean it's the good I ought to do. And so my closest friends were able to say, you might be doing that thing where, there's a lot of things you could do and enjoy and be good at, but is it really the right time right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very, very grateful indeed that you gave your time to writing the book.
Yes.
It was a great gift to us, and I'm sure it'll be a real gift to other childless people. It's called All My Friends Have Issues, available from all good bookstores, as they say. And it remains only to say thank you very, very much for your time today. It's been absolutely marvelous talking to you.
Thank you. You too. It's been a delight with the minutia that you read and absorbed the book. It made me feel purposeful. I appreciate you.